So another negative day coming through for the overall market. But just taking a look at how the Naira has been faring, it also seems a bit of negativity that's come through on the currency front.
Hello, sorry, I didn't hear you. Could you take that again?
We had negativity on the NSE all share, markets closing in negative territory, and the Naira is also posting losses against the US dollar.
Yes, that has to do with some of the political risk around the country. Last week, the major issue that dominated the news last week and into this week was the security risk in Sokoto, you know, the killings of the British and the Italian citizen, which kind of heightened political risk around the country and reflected in the numbers this today.
I mean, just looking at what we can expect into the week ahead, of course, we are expecting, again, lots of numbers coming through from the banking sector. Zenith out with their full-year results and also looking quite strong. What kind of expectation are you expecting going forward?
Yeah, we've entered the earnings season. Zenith once again has led in the release of its year-end earnings. But right now, investors are fixated on the numbers, especially the provisionings. Zenith had a provision of 24 billion plus in these results compared to 4 billion last year. We're expecting provisions as well from UBA. We're expecting provisions from First Bank because of and we're also expecting provisions from Diamond Bank. So there will be kind of some fixation, some focus on the provisionings, irrespective of the increase in earnings. But from GT Bank, we hope GT Bank can bring some kind of respite into the market this week when it releases its numbers as well, where we're not expecting such provisionings from.
Okay, are you also very bullish on the overall banking sector?
Yes, I'm quite bullish, but I must recognize that these provisionings would provide some kind of caution in investment outlook. We had all anticipated that this year we would not see such provisionings, provisionings from 2 years ago. But unfortunately, like I said, even with Zenith's impressive net profits, even with Zenith's impressive headline figures, the gross revenues grew properly, we're still nervous about the kinds of provisionings we've seen. So that's going to affect investor outlook altogether.
Okay, so let's also just touch on MTN. We know that there's been quite a strong reaction with regards to the mandatory listing. What is the overall sentiment on the ground from the investor community?
First and foremost, we just need to clear something. I think this rhetoric around mandatory, we need to actually clarify it. The House of Reps have come out and they've said, look, we're not looking at making these listings compulsory. The hearings this week, for instance, the law being proposed would actually be looking at encouraging big corporations from the telecom sector, which would involve companies like MTN, the oil and gas as well. So I think the new focus shouldn't be on mandatory any longer. It should be on the encouragement. So what kind of incentives are we looking at from the House of Reps when they write the law to encourage these listings? What kind of incentives, what kinds of modalities we put in place? How do they intend to ensure that companies like MTN can raise capital on the exchange, either through bonds or through equities? So I think the rhetoric should actually be moving away from mandatory. It did start from mandatory listing, but very quickly we should actually be moving away from mandatory.
Okay, that's an interesting point. I mean, what one needs to also focus on, that it seems that multinational companies, even companies that are South African, which of course is in Africa, need a little bit of a push and a shove so that they do embark on secondary or third listings on an African bourse. What do you think the reticence, where do you think the reticence comes from? Is it the fear of a lack of liquidity? Is it because it's just a very high risk market for a lot of the companies out there, despite the fact that they're operating within those regions?
I think for Nigeria, for instance, the major factor has to be the ability to raise capital on the exchange. About 3-4 years ago, companies were raising as much as ₦1 trillion, 600 billion naira. But cumulatively last year, companies only raised about 100 billion on the Nigerian market. MTN raises quite an amount in Nigeria, but so much of it comes through loan syndications and not through capital raisings. As long as the equity market, the Nigerian equity market and corporate bonds market is finding it difficult to raise sufficient capital for companies, then really there's no incentive to come on the exchange. So I think those are the kinds of issues we should be addressing. How can we attract capital the way we did 4-5 years ago, such that MTN would see cost to list, would be able to attract cheaper capital on the stock exchange. Yeah. Except without doing that, then we'll just continue with these rhetorics.
Okay, so let's just quickly take a look again to see how the Nigerian Stock Exchange fared today. And as you can see, it's actually up marginally, up 141 points, 21,091. The previous graph that we put up, unfortunately, a slight technical glitch there. But as you can see, a positive day that has come through, albeit very marginal for the Nigerian stock market. Jimmy, let's just go back to what we saw on the Zenith Bank front. We're just talking about the overall performance going forward. Do you think that these kind of levels can be maintained? Because we actually saw gross earnings gaining around 27%. So these are strong numbers on the gross and the net front.
Yeah, I think Zenith can actually maintain these numbers. Like I said, without the provisionings, then just add 24 billion to their net profits, and you can imagine what the figures would have been like. So investors are quite impressed with the numbers, especially the net profits. Then you also have a 94 kobo dividends. But let's remember that we're coming from 2-3 years ago where the major problem in the financial sector, the output of the problem was the record provisionings we saw. So the moment investors see any little signs, any little signals that we are not out of that morass, which led to record write-downs, then there's some sort of nervousness, which we may see, especially when other banks begin to release these kinds of numbers. UBA, for instance, has told, released earnings warnings. So that is actually another a trigger actually causing some form of nervousness. Investors don't just want to see profits. They want to see profits without those forms of provisions that actually triggered the crisis 2-3 years ago.